Well, welcome back to our Hard Love series. So glad that you've joined us today. Well, after seeing or hearing the message from Sunday, we talked about 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7, that talks about how love always trusts, it always hopes, it always perseveres, it's always trying to protect. And that's an important verse, but there's some things in there, as we talked about, that are kind of could come across as maybe bad advice, that particularly the part about always trust. And so if we're thinking through that, we talked very specifically about always trusting means that we try to believe the best, not just automatically assume the worst. We're going to believe the best until it is absolutely proven true that there is there's a problem here and we have to address it. Right. And so we want to talk a little bit about both of that in this session. So what about with you in our relationship? What are some expectations that you had, maybe early on, maybe now, that maybe I didn't match up to your expectation, either because I was being lame for some reason or I didn't know what the expectation was? What's some for you?
Right. I know at the beginning, whenever you would come home late from work, and this was before we were working for a church, we were just a young married couple, I would always think, because I'm an eternal optimist and a romantic at heart, that maybe he's buying me flowers. And then you would come home and you'd be, tired that you were late and frustrated, and there was never flowers, and I was always so disappointed. And I think I just always hope for some romantic gesture, because when we were dating, that was often the case. But you get into marriage and you're just frustrated you had to work late. And I had this expectation of maybe he's thinking of me, maybe he's doing something romantic and special for me. And then that was rarely the case.
Yeah, because what was in my head that was romantic is hurry up and get home. Yeah. Getting home would be that gesture as fast as I can so I'm not too late. And, in those early days, very specifically, flowers never crossed my mind until I walked through the door and saw your face. Oh.
Yeah, oh, no flowers. Okay.
Right. Yeah, so that's one of you were trying to give me, for being late, you're trying to give me something, you're trying to fill in that gap with something positive. But you had an expectation, and I certainly wasn't meeting that expectation. So when there's a gap, whether, what we're expecting from each other, the things that we think are going to happen, when there's a gap, what do we actually say or what do we actually do to kind of fill that gap, by believing the best or assuming the worst? And because we actually have some actions to that. I know one for me was I didn't know going in that I just assumed that everybody was good with money, right? That you just take care of your money and you just do what you have to do, and the reason you have money is because you took care of your money. Mm-hmm. And it took me a while to learn that was not, you didn't come into our marriage with that being one of your strengths,
right,
of dealing with the finances. And so I thought that you would, but it didn't take long for me to realize that what I was expecting was not what I was experiencing whenever it came with money. And so I found myself putting in that gap, just assume the worst. And every time I was going to take a look at our bank account, I went into it going, oh man, what am I going to find this time? Mm-hmm. Or what's going to not be there, or what's going to have bounced, or how much more money am I going to owe, and all of this. I went there because of the experience rather than having a conversation about it or trying to give you some leeway and actually really believe the best about you. So right. It's really easy to get in that cycle of negativity of well, they're always this, or they're always that, or they never this. And so I think it's one of the ways that we get into that. And I know that was one for me for sure, about assuming the worst. So in 1 Corinthians, as we talked about, the always trust part. So that could come across again as bad advice, because what it sounds like is just keep giving, just keep giving, just keep giving, just keep giving over and over and over. And I know that sounds like you should have this eternal well of trust, and that's not realistic, or maybe even possible without some conversation.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What happens when you've believed the best and you believe the best, and all of a sudden you realize he's not bringing me flowers, or I realize she's not going to write down every check that she puts in there. And we have to have a tough conversation, because you can't just keep believing the best about that, because either, you're going to be completely frustrated with me not showing you some romantic gesture, or I'm going to be frustrated with you because we can't go buy groceries. Right?
Right.
So having a tough conversation, let's talk about that, because it's certainly something you have to do as well.
Right, because if you don't, you're going to build resentments. And so I think the best thing is to make sure yourself that your side of the street is cleaned up, that you go into this thinking, okay, am I just super angry? Am I resentful? Where is my heart in this before I approach this person that I love? And then remembering who this person is. I chose this person. I chose to enter into this relationship with them, whether it was 5 years ago or 30 years ago. This was my person, and I fell in love with them. So let me remember who they are. Going back to that, I chose them because of this, this, and this. And yes, they may have weaknesses, because we all have weaknesses. But who is that person really? And I think going in, remembering who they are and their heart, and that their heart is not out to cause me pain. There is not one time that I've ever thought, you're just out to run my life. There's a reason behind, whatever that has happened. And digging deep into that and remembering who that person is. Wouldn't you agree?
I do, but the problem is that we don't go there immediately. That's the problem, and I think that's where the gap in relationship happens, is that we don't go there. What we do is we're already in this cycle of, I'm going to assume the worst about you, and so I go into this tough conversation already believing something negative.
Right.
And I think you've got to go into the conversation, and this is a learned habit. It's something you've got to really work on. You've got to go into that conversation, and the way you believe the best, what that sounds like is, I'm going into this conversation, and I know there's a reason why you did what you did. I'm asking for that reason, and I'm believing that you're not trying to disappoint me. You're not trying to bankrupt us. I'm not trying to destroy our love. That I'm believing the best about you, even going into the tough conversation. Because I think what happens is, when we get to tough conversations, sometimes I know that what we've done is we've gone to the tough conversation and we've started it from the negative side. And you're never going to end up positive starting from the negative side.
Right.
So going into that, to believe that you're not trying to disappoint or hurt, believing the best, even though this might be a tough conversation.
Right. Presuming innocence until proven guilty, until the person says, you know what, I was trying to do whatever. But presuming innocence, that I'm going to go in this with an open mind and ask for an explanation. Because it could be that maybe you couldn't check the account, or maybe, you were in a car accident, or you ran out of gas. It wasn't that, oh, I knew you'd never do that.
So thinking back on that, coming home late. So that's kind of a big one, because what the problem was is there was something deeper of why I was coming home late, right? There was something more there that you didn't know about, as we've talked about in previous videos in this series, is that I had a wall up with that. So I would come home and I didn't care whether you were really upset about that at all. I did care, because when I walked in I had to face it. But while I was in the moment of work, that was not my idea behind that, is that, oh, I better hurry and get home for the right reasons. And so I think it's important to know that sometimes there are negative reasons, even though you're assuming the best or believing the best, there are actually there are negative reasons, and you got to get to the heart of what those are. And so in the case of the flowers, what is the real reason why I'm thinking so much about work and not really having any thought of you to think, I love her so much, I just want to show her tonight that I love her, and so I'm going to swing by the store and pick up some flowers. And I loved you enough that I left work early enough to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think when you go into those tough conversations, if you don't go in thinking there's a reason, and it may be negative, but even if it's the worst thing that I could imagine, like you said, I chose this person and I want to believe the best about them, that what they're doing is they're struggling somewhere. Mm-hmm. There's a struggle, and I'm in it with them. And to get in the struggle with them, not just, you're a terrible person, you're a horrible husband, you don't do this, you don't do that, you suck as a wife, or whatever it is. but to go, there is a real problem, and I chose this person, and I believe the best about them at the beginning, meaning I know they have the capability of being that, so get into the problem with them rather than just condemning them for what that is. And I think there's a big piece of getting out of that negative mindset where we just go there instantly and coming in believing the best, even believing the best about them in their mistake, in their sin, in their addiction, believing the best about them no matter what that is about them.
Yeah, and being committed to working through that. Because I talk to a lot of friends who will say, you know, I think I just made a mistake, I shouldn't have been with this person, and I need to find someone new. But every relationship is going to have baggage you bring in, just like we talked about before. You're going to come in with stuff from your childhood, and it is better, and I know for us, we committed, no matter what kind of baggage there is, no matter what kind of problems we face, we are in this together till the end. We made a vow, we made a commitment to God, and we're going to stick this out. And there may be some dark times. There were for us. Some dark times where we thought, well, this is too hard. But it's worth it when you persevere. And you say, no matter what your weaknesses are, no matter what trouble you're going through. You know, there was a time when I was struggling with depression, and I didn't want to get out of bed, and I didn't want to be the fun wife for a while because I was physically having problems and emotionally having problems, but you stuck with me. And we kept going. And I think that is the commitment that makes it last, because you can enter into several marriages or several relationships. You're still going to run into stuff like that.
Yeah, it's because what's in you is what's in you, and that's what's going to come out even if you change the face or where you live.
That's right.
And I think the important thing for us all to remember, because you're in a relationship, you know there's going to be gaps in that relationship. It's just going to happen. You have expectations whether you've spoken them or you haven't spoken them, and then you're going to experience something else. And when it comes to love, always trust, I think the thing we have to remember is that that's not just some belief that would be like a utopia kind of situation. That's in the gap. That's when you find the gap in your relationship, that believing the best, always trusting, really works, because it doesn't take away the fact that you need to have a hard conversation. Have the hard conversation, but come into the conversation ready to have the conversation at a time when they can be ready to receive it, and believe the best no matter what it is, because you got into this relationship with that person knowing that this was the person you wanted to be with. So there were reasons for that. And if you can get back to that and go into that relationship no matter what you find out or what you figure out the reason is, and that's all the conversation is I'm asking for the reason. And I think having those conversations is key to always trusting. And so what we don't want to say is that always trust means just, one day this will get better. One day this will get better. No, the way it gets better is sometimes through conflict, through hard conversations. And you come out of that on the other side with something that you maybe never thought that you could have.
Right. I remember back when we've had some difficult conversations, and those ended up being the time of a deeper intimacy between us, because we were vulnerable. We let each other know where we were coming from and what we were really feeling, instead of just shooting words at each other and just saying accusatory things. We got to the heart of what's really going on underneath all this. And that's when we were actually much closer together. And those were the times, even if it was conflicts over the kids, we had to get to the root of it. And then it was sort of like you and me against the world. Yeah. We can do this together. We're going to face whatever this problem is together. But we had to be in it. And to do that, we had to become vulnerable and know each other and expose, the underbelly of why I'm hurting, why this makes me so upset. When this happened, this is how I felt. Those conversations are not easy, but they are so worth it and beneficial.
Well, every relationship has gaps, and the key to this working is you get to choose what you put in there. So you can believe the best or you can assume the worst, but that's your choice. You get to choose that. And that's what makes 1 Corinthians 13 actually work when we say always trust. But as the title of this series has been, that's hard love. And it ain't easy. And so keeping that in mind, that you do have a choice. As you find that gap in your relationship, keep moving forward with that. And always trust. Choose to believe the best. And when you choose to believe the best, even in the worst of circumstances, amazing things can happen and relationships can blossom. and your relationship can go forward, even though it may seem like the worst thing that could have ever happened. God has an amazing way to use a person who believes the best. And the reason I believe he does is because you're acting more like Jesus in that moment than maybe any other time when you go through conflict and you choose to believe the best. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this series. We've certainly enjoyed talking about it, so you've done a great job. And thanks for joining us with this and being a part of it. I hope your group has a great discussion around this. And I hope that you do fall in love and fall in deep and you stay there, even though it may be hard, but that you stay there forever. Thanks for joining us.